It's grim to recall now, but back in the early 60s, Shrewsbury Prison staged its last execution. 21-year-old George Riley was hanged for the murder of a 62-year-old neighbour, Adeline Smith. The death penalty had been controversial for decades, and Riley's case is still a talking point in the town. Well, now a writer, himself from Shrewsbury, says he believes Riley was innocent. He's writing a book about the case. He's keen to talk to anyone involved with the trial. The 8 o'clock toll of church bells echoed around Shrewsbury Prison. It was February the 9th, 1961. Inside, George Riley was being led to the gallows, the last man to be hanged in the town. I was a schoolboy in Shrewsbury at the time of the execution, and I remember it really quite well. I was chillingly aware of the dramatic event that was going on just a few miles down the road. And what made it far more significant for me was the fact that George Riley's father, George Sr., was a physical training instructor at my school. His courage and dignity at a time of such withering distress was really quite remarkable. Newspaper reports from the time said Riley was drunk when he killed his neighbour, Adeline Smith, after breaking into her home to steal money. The day he was hanged, a crowd gathered outside, protesting against the death penalty and what many believed was an unsafe conviction.
George Riley was innocent because there wasn't a scrap of evidence to prove that he murdered Mrs. Smith, other than a disputed confession.
The notorious case has become an obsession for writer Mike Wood. He spent months poring over the archives and evidence from the time.
He's constantly being pressured. George, we know you did it. George, we've got your fingerprints. George, we've got your footprints. None of this is true. So George has obviously thought, well, maybe I did do it. But I was so drunk, maybe I did, but I can't remember doing it.
A lot was made of Riley's heavy drinking and brawling at his trial. On the night of the murder, he'd been to the Admiral Benbow pub. I've come here to meet someone else with a close connection to the case. In 1961, 91-year-old Sheila Meredith was working in the police CID department, and she was in court when Riley was sentenced to death.
I was sitting very near to his father. Oh, and that was the worst thing. I was thinking, the poor man, his son has just been condemned to death. It was the worst time of my life, that was, funnily enough, and it's been with me ever since, and I've thought of George on and off all those years.
So Mike's book will conclude George Riley a victim rather than a villain. He'd love to hear from anyone directly involved in the case.
I would give my right arm to speak to someone that was on the jury.
So if George Riley didn't do it, the inevitable question is, who did?
It's $1 million question. The hunt goes on. But my hunch is, if it's the person I think it was, he's still alive.
George Riley's family were adamant to the end that he was innocent. The death penalty was suspended in 1965 and abolished permanently in 1969. Guilty or not, it was 4 years too late for George Riley.